and welcome to another episode of our WCN-Fluencer podcast. I'm your host, Christopher McClellan, and yes, I am the bow tie guy, even though you can't see that bow tie. I told you on our last episode I was going to get the beard trimmed, but it's grown since then. But I don't know, I got to make a choice. Is it the beard or the bow tie? And my special guest today, Helen Bauer, from one of our newest podcasts, the Heart of Hospice. Maybe Helen can help me decide. What do you think, Helen? Is it the beard or the bow tie?
Okay, I'm going to put in my vote for the beard.
Okay. Because you can't really have both unless you kind of trim these, but...
Yeah, I would vote for the beard. Yeah.
One for the beard, I think, well, two actually, because I'm voting for myself as well. But Helen, we digress just a little bit, but it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you and your beard and barely your bow tie.
Well, they do have some polka dots on them, but but you are one of our newest podcasts, the Heart of Hospice. And
yes.
We're going to welcome you, but tell us about your podcast. And then I the question I'm going to want to start out with is, why is it so hard to talk about hospice?
Well, the podcast got started about 6 years ago. And so we are one of the old fogies of the podcasting world. We were looking at how do you get out unbiased, accurate information that people could listen to whenever they wanted to, and it wouldn't cost them a dime, and it would come from people who are working in the field, in the death positive movement, in the funeral industry, and in the end-of-life care industry. And so a podcast seemed like the best way to get it out there. I have a background in hospice nursing, and I've been a nurse for over 30 years, and it just seemed a very natural fit. And when you tell people, I have a podcast, that's very interesting. And then when you tell them, well, it's about death and dying, you get that half scared of you, half I think you're creepy look.
Right.
Oh, you must be a special person. But what they're really thinking is you're a weirdo, that you want to talk about this or you want to work in this area. I think death is such a taboo subject, taboo topic, because it's the complete unknown.
Right. Complete
unknown. So there's a lot of fear surrounding it for most people.
And part of that fear is it's not openly talked about often enough.
That's true. In our culture and Western cultures, we don't talk so much about that. There's almost a superstition that if we talk about it, it's going to make it happen.
Right.
Well, and
right.
Remember is it's going to happen anyway. 100% of the people listening to this podcast are going to die.
Right. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
No, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if we could talk about it and transition into it and honor it and recognize it just the way we do birth, so that we have a different sort of comfort level.
Oh goodness, you brought up one of the analogies that I wanted to talk about today. So I'm just going to kind of dig right into it. As you know, I just celebrated my 66th birthday, and 66 years ago, parents, the birthing process, mothers usually did that by themselves. And, modern times, if I could use that word, the birthing process is celebrated. There's people in the delivery room. They're welcoming life. And I've always wondered why that celebratory, I don't know if celebratory is the right word to use, but when life transitions, why aren't we there to be with that person? Why is that hard?
I think some of it is related to the way we've medicalized death. We've mechanized it, especially here in the United States. The machines and the tubes, even the environment that it happens in. So many people die in the hospital. And that doesn't do anything but distance us from it.
Right.
In funeral industry, and I hate to say processing, but the funeral process and how a body is taken care of traditionally here in the United States is the same way. All of it made to distance us.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the intention is by distancing you from some of those more uncomfortable, awkward, or scary things, the gross things, then somehow that's better for us as human beings. You move past it better and faster. It's cleaner to get rid of it. The grief is cleaner. When, in fact, what we are realizing now is that a death at home is where most people want to be.
Right.
And having your family with you is better than having your doctor with you.
Right.
Yes.
I know we've talked numerous times offline about the celebratory aspect of being there with somebody as they make their transition. And you've heard me say this, but I don't think there's any greater honor than to be present with somebody when they make a transition.
Oh, it's absolutely true.
I've been fortunate, fortunate is the right word. I held Richard in my arms when he made his life transition. But I'm fortunate in where I've had experience in hospice, and so many people end up learning about hospice while they're right in the middle of it. And I think the work that you're doing, that's why it's so important, is you're informing people about the process, because it's more than just about dying.
Absolutely. And hospice is more than just care for someone who's dying.
Right.
Hospice is about hope and quality of life and end-of-life wishes and comfort and connection and relation and companioning. But again, we get so caught up in the medical part of things,
right,
that it's easy to lose sight of the human part of things.
And I think that's so spot on target. The human side of this, when we accept our own limitations and mortality. We all want to live as long as we possibly can, and as with as much quality of life that we can. But what hospice is, what I have come to learn about my experience and talking to people like yourselves, is it makes us a situation, I'm going to use that word, situation, a little bit more peaceful.
Yes. That's what we're supposed to do.
That's what we're, right.
Yeah. If hospice is done well and done right, that's exactly what it does.
And I think it's also a calling to work in hospice. So I'd like to kind of tap into what led you into this area of nursing.
I love that question because I love telling the story of how I got into hospice. There are a lot of hospice nurses that will tell you, oh, I felt a calling, I felt led, I felt it was my mission. A lot of them connect that to their faith or their spiritual side of their humanity. For me, it was very different. It was a stumble. I was ready to move from being a part-time working, half stay-at-home mom to working full-time as my kids got older. And I had a friend that I absolutely loved that said, I worked with this hospice team and we have an opening for an RN. You should give it a try. And I had never done anything pretty much except for home health, community-based care for probably 15 years before I went into hospice. And she said, you should come. It's a hospice case manager. And I thought, oh, nursing is nursing is nursing. So clueless, so clueless. And the first ride-along visit that I did after I took the job was with an LVN. And when we got to the patient's home, they had said she was having a bad day. And what it ended up being was the patient was actively dying when we got there. Mm-hmm. And I witnessed the most incredible companioning by this LVN who was very experienced in hospice and the family members of the person who was dying. The patient had end-stage Alzheimer's, and she was bedbound. She hadn't talked in months and months. Incontinent, everything you expect from an end-stage Alzheimer's patient. I had never seen a patient in that phase of an illness, a disease before. And I watched her daughter-in-law climb into the bed with this body that was contracted and cradle her like a baby.
Oh, my.
And so the woman, the patient, her name was Marie. I believe in the power of remembering people by their names. And there's no HIPAA violation because it's just her first name. Marie had confided in her family that when she could still talk and communicate well, that she only had one fear, and that was dying alone. So this woman in her family got into the bed and held her like she was a child and curled up with her and whispered in her ear and talked to her as she took her last few breaths. And I had never seen anything like that. Never experienced a personal loss, but never seen anything like that in my nursing career until that very day. And I listened to the LVN, whose name was Vicky, companion and carry and support, grief support for this family as they did this. And I have never, I think out of all the deaths that I've seen or have been with families after the death occurred, I've never seen anything that impacted me as much as this. To watch this family do this. And I was told later on this was not her daughter, this was her daughter-in-law.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, so it wasn't blood family, it was by marriage. And daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law, they get a bad rap. Sometimes the relationship isn't that great, but she'd been her caregiver for years. And to care for her like that, to forget about the plastic sheet underneath the body and the Foley catheter and the mouth that was open and all of that, and reach all the way in to her humanity. And find that fear and say, I'm going to walk with you so that you don't have to be scared. It still brings me to tears, and that's been 13 years. And I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I could not imagine not the impact that I would have on people, but they would impact my life like that. And it's been like that every single time. Every single time. They're not all beautiful. They're not all great.
Right.
Some patients don't have, quote unquote, a good death. Either in the nurse's eyes or in the family's eyes. Maybe it wasn't what the patient wanted or the family wanted for them. But I learned something and was impacted by every single patient, every single death I was privileged to be present for.
Boy, that word that you just used, privileged. It is a privilege to be with somebody when life transitions.
Absolutely.
No matter what your religious beliefs or personal beliefs would be in this area, I'm just even the hardest criminal. People really shouldn't die alone.
It's true. And it's an incredible life lesson. Dying is an incredible life lesson.
Right. Right.
Yes.
I mean, there's no, while you've experienced people dying, we don't have that experience ourselves until it happens. And it's not an experience that we can communicate to,
Right.
What it's going to be like. I mean, I think we all think about it, what it's going to be like, but we really don't know. But when we can be there with somebody else, it provides some comfort. both externally and internally.
It does. It is an incredible thing when I think about all the different silos of nursing that I could have pursued.
Mm-hmm.
I'll work out the end of my career in hospice.
Oh.
You know, I'm not at the bedside anymore, and I do miss that. But there have been plenty of personal opportunities as I've gotten older.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my father-in-law passed away during the pandemic, and so I was part of the family caregiving village that companioned him. You know, I was a little on the outskirts because his children were taking care of him and his wife. Mm-hmm. But I think it changes you, not just how you think about death. I think being present and being aware and being in touch with people who are dying and facing end of life changes you. And how you look. Yeah, I think it changes how you look at your own life.
Yeah, which I think is a perfect segue into one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is the most misunderstood concept or theory in and around hospice?
There's so many, it's hard to pick one. And of course, you know, I have my pet peeves, things that aggravate me when people say about hospice when I know they're not true. I think the biggest myth surrounding hospice, because this would include several different pieces, is that you lose control of your life. You lose control of whatever's left of your life if hospice becomes involved in your care. I think that's probably the biggest misunderstanding. Mm-hmm. You know, that you can't have your meds, or you can't go places. You couldn't see a doctor. You know, you have to be homebound. I think that's a lot of it. I think that's a lot of it. You don't have control over what's happening to you anymore.
And one of the things that I learned along the way when we selected hospice for Richard, radiation treatment. Now, you know, and each hospice, obviously has their own rules and regulations, but the radiation treatment he was receiving was not curative. It was palliative.
Yes.
Because it was providing him comfort. But, you know, I didn't know that beforehand until I started researching this for him. Because the radiation treatment was essential for his comfort. We both knew that it wasn't going to cure it. But hospice in and of itself, as I understand it, is about making the family comfortable. It's not just the patient. It's when I knew that he was being comforted and cared for, that took some of the pain off of me as well. And that's why I love having these real meaningful and down-to-earth conversations with somebody like yourself who is in it and gets it.
Yeah. It's, you know, palliative treatments like the radiation to shrink a tumor, to shrink a brain tumor or a bowel obstructive tumor, that's about comfort. They know there's no cure for it, but it does help to manage pain. That absolutely is okay when you're on hospice. That's part of what we do. And isn't it true that if you're caring for someone and you know they're in good hands and the care is appropriate and having that enhances quality of life, that's a huge burden off the caregiver.
Because it really all comes down to quality of life. You know, providing that. You know, what are the paths to providing quality of life?
Right.
And if hospice is definitely one of them, then why not? But we need to educate those who might look at it as, oh my God, this is the last day, but it's not.
Right. So if pain management, being pain-free, is quality of life, hospice helps with that.
Right.
if being able to breathe without panicking or feeling like you're suffocating, if that's quality of life, hospice helps with that.
No.
Right. If knowing you can't get out to a doctor, but somebody's going to come and visit your house is quality of life, hospice helps with that too.
Hospice helps with that. And I think you're developing a wonderful tool to help people navigate all these ins and outs of hospice. So why don't you tell our viewers, I got to get used to saying viewers because I'm always saying listeners, but tell our viewers about your navigation program that you're developing.
Absolutely. Hospice Navigation Services is going to launch spring of 2023, coming up actually just in a few weeks. It's going to be a service for anybody who's having to consider hospice care for themselves or for someone they care about, to provide them with unbiased information about end-of-life care, how it works, who pays for it, and have a chance to ask questions and get answers. They'll be talking to hospice navigators that are experienced hospice professionals that are not affiliated with a hospice agency. So the information they get doesn't commit them to anything. It's just for their support and education, so they have a better end-of-life experience when they do engage hospice.
It's kind of like that one-stop shop where you can go to and feel comfortable knowing that you're getting information from professionals who understand what your journey is about to be.
Exactly. And, I'm the lead navigator, obviously. I also have a personal hospice experience. I've been caregiver and medical power of attorney for a friend of mine, as well as helping with my father-in-law's care. So I understand the perspective that comes from being a family member or a caregiver. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of decisions. There's a reason they call it caregiving burden.
Right.
So Hospice Navigation Services is designed to ease that burden by giving people tools and information they can use that helps them make great choices, find a good fit for a hospice agency, and just to make the most out of that experience that they can.
And that's one of the other reasons why I'm so thrilled to have you part of the Whole Care Network, because as I look back in my social work experience and trying to provide the most up-to-date and accurate information and referral for people who are searching information that is critical to their current situation, what you're creating with the navigation system is spot on target for people that are, whether they're searching a little bit before they really are in need or right in the middle of a crisis. And of course, I might be able to speak for you here, but I'm sure you'd prefer that people, let's kind of plan ahead and not wait to the last moment when we're sitting in the back of an ambulance trying to figure out let's see, what are we going to do? Well, that unfortunately happens all too often, where we're making these critical decisions in the midst of an emotional experience, and we all, I certainly know what it's like making an emotional decision.
Absolutely.
They usually don't turn out well. So
no, they don't. But the navigation service sessions are designed to meet people, whether they've been caregivers for years and have just sort of transitioned slowly into needing hospice, or something has happened very suddenly and they have to discuss hospice right then. It's like you're saying, acute events happen, heart attacks, strokes, catastrophic events, and you're forced into these situations. But there's some commonalities that make it difficult to have every one of those conversations, regardless from what angle you come at it from. You're scared, you're grieving, you're overwhelmed with information, you feel an urgency to make decisions, to get things squared away, and I would hope most people want to do the best job they can in making those choices and decisions for someone they care about.
I think that's the common thread across the board, is people want to make the best decisions that they possibly can, but often don't know where to find that key that will unlock all those resources. And you're putting together. This is awesome. So
thank you.
So let our listeners know. There I go. Let our viewers know about your podcast when I think your episodes drop every
week.
Every week. I want to say Saturdays, but I'm
very close.
I'm very close,
Fridays.
but I'm gonna go Fridays.
There you go.
A new episode every Friday, and your podcast is obviously on the Whole Care Network, but available on all the popular podcast platforms. So tell us a little bit some about your guest and what's coming up.
Let's see. Well, guests, we have a huge variety of guests. We've had over 100 different guest interviews. Mm-hmm. Some of the most innovative, intelligent people working in the end-of-life space. We talk a lot about advanced care planning. You touched on that a minute ago. If you can plan ahead a little bit, have those conversations. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We talk a lot about that. We talk about grief. We talk about bereavement, because grief doesn't just start when a death occurs. Grief starts when the identity changes, when the illness starts. Right, yes. Yeah. So we talk a lot about grief. We're talking with social workers. We're talking about chaplains or spiritual counselors, grief experts, you name it, people who are working in the green funeral industry and the home funeral industry, so that people have choices and information that they can use to find something that feels good and comfortable and right for them. And you can find the podcast on the heartofhospice.com, as well as on the Whole Care Network site. We're on Instagram and Facebook as well. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And we're out there. We love interacting with people on Instagram, especially, and LinkedIn. And we have content for consumers and people who are providers as well. And I think that's really important. I would want your listeners and your viewers.
Very good.
Yeah, that's one of the hazards of being a podcaster.
That's right.
It's important for people to know that it's not just for people who need information about hospice because they need to have a personal experience with it, but there's information and education for hospice providers as well. If you need information about home funerals because you're a social worker and you want to share that information with your patients and families, we're talking about that. Yeah. If you want to talk as a chaplain about spiritual care and how it's appropriate for atheists, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Wiccan, we're going to be talking about that. Mm-hmm. So there's information for people who are providing the care and for people who are consuming the care.
Helen, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I want to have you back because I want to talk about the green funeral industry and how that all works. I want to do this again. But Helen, with the great work that you're doing, you are certainly a WCN-Fluencer, and I can't thank you enough for being a part of the Whole Care Network.
Thank you so much, Chris.